Hi guys, I'm Cori Whitlock with Whitlox Homestead, and this is the first of 10 videos that we're making to help you hit the ground running when you first bring home your wood-fired forge. The topic we're discussing today is fire management. So the first concept that you have to understand about blacksmithing with wood is that what you're really doing is blacksmithing with charcoal. Here is a quick history lesson on charcoal. First, it actually predates coal as a fuel source for blacksmithing. The Vikings, Japanese, and ancient Romans would all have used charcoal to forge their superior weapons. These days, many people are more familiar with the idea of blacksmithing with the fossil fuel coal than the idea of wood or charcoal. Coal came into more widespread use and wood shortages in England in the 16th and 17th centuries that were caused by deforestation. But before that, as you might have guessed, craftsmen would have burned wood or charcoal. So that wraps up our history lesson. Back to our forge. The concepts behind it are not a modern discovery, but we have streamlined their execution by combining the process of making charcoal with the process of burning it. So the key design elements to note here are the forced air, obviously a necessity for any high temperature metalwork. We have our draft tube here, air comes in the bottom. You can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 holes open. And the next thing you need to notice is the V-shaped fire bed. If we didn't have this, then our fire would burn like a campfire and you would in fact not be able to blacksmith with wood. The V-shape keeps the wood progressing downwards, so instead of your hot spots dissipating or smoking or getting away from your air source, they are in a predictable and concentrated hot spot at the bottom of the forge. That's the main innovation with this style forge. Nothing's really special about burning charcoal, nothing too special about burning wood, but you have to have these features for it to actually work practically. Now that we know basically what's going on in our fire bed, let's talk about our fuel preparation, because this makes a huge difference in how your fire burns. The size and shape of your fuel matters, because this influences how it burns, how it feeds into the forge, and ultimately how it converts to charcoal. I've come to prefer this longer, skinny shape because it's both easier to prepare and it falls more easily towards the bottom of the forge. As for size, I've gone ahead and given you actual measurements for the ideal fuel in my experience, but these numbers are just general guidelines to help get you started. It's more important that you understand that it's all about surface area when it comes to burning wood, because the wood can only burn where it has contact with the heat from the fire and the oxygen from the draft. To summarize, the dimensions determine the surface area, which determines how much of the wood can actually be burning and producing heat at once. Every time you split your wood, you expose another surface, and so increase the surface area. This means that small sticks will tend to burn hot and fast and then be gone before they're able to convert to charcoal. But you can still use them in your forge. All you have to do is pack them in tightly to reduce the surface area and slow the burn time to allow it to convert to charcoal. Larger fuel has too little surface area, and so it burns slow and cold. You can compensate for this somewhat by running a larger fire, adding more fuel and therefore more surface area, but there is an upward limit because the firebox is only so large. Now that you have the perfect size of fuel with plenty of air, you may still have trouble getting up to a forging temperature if you try to use wet wood. Your wood should be at least 80% dry. And that's not bone dry, but it should at least be not damp to the touch. Water requires a huge amount of heat energy to heat, bring to a boil, convert to steam, and finally evaporate from your fuel, so I highly recommend taking precautions to keep your fuel supply dry. Lastly, I often get asked whether hardwood or softwood burns better in the forge. In my forge, I use mostly softer woods from our properties such as Douglas fir, hemlock, alder, cottonwood, etc. These woods have worked splendidly for me, but I have also used hardwoods such as maple or oak in my forge. I found that the hardwood produced more ash in my forge, but also required less fuel volume than the softwood. Basically, I've found that it doesn't really matter what type of wood you use in your forge. Just use common sense and don't use excessively aromatic or toxic woods, and don't use wet wood, and you should be fine. I think that covers most of the things you ought to know before you actually get started. I'll give you a quick look at my normal process for preparing my own fuel, and then we'll actually get the fire going. So first, set your draft tube. If you're using a large forge, I use about 4 holes for most projects. And then start your fire. I use a lighter and cardboard, but you can use a blowtorch, you can use special fire starters. Whatever you prefer, the main idea is to build up a lot of heat at the beginning so that your wood doesn't start smoldering and taking forever to build up some momentum. So start small but hot, and then keep it hot as you're building your fire up to forging temperatures. I'm being pretty generous with my cardboard because it was both cold and damp today. And once I start adding my wood, you'll see I've split it up into kindling so it catches very easily. So once you start adding your wood, you just want to watch to make sure you're not smothering your fire. This is easy to do if you're in a hurry or if your wood you're starting with is a little bit too big. So I'm zooming in, you can see it's not catching how I would expect, and I know that there's more heat under there. So I'm gonna dig in with my fire poker a little bit and unblock the air holes. So as soon as I do that, it flames right up and you can see the wood's burning much better now. I didn't change the air supply at all, that was just because of ash in the holes. So you want to pay attention and poke it around a little bit if it doesn't seem like it's burning quite right. So we've got a pretty healthy little fire going, and this is not too early to add my piece of steel if that's what I wanted to do. I'm going to take my time building this fire up to show you guys, but if you're looking for temperatures hot enough to forge, the colors are exactly the same in the fire as they would be on the steel. So if I'm looking in my fire and I see white hot coals, that will heat a piece of steel white hot. So it's pretty easy to tell. There's not a different rule for the wood and a different rule for the steel. So now I'm piling on my bigger pieces of fuel because I can see the heat has built up enough to take it, and you're gonna see it flame up as the larger mass of wood is being converted to charcoal. So I sometimes get questions about this part, about how tall the flames get and how intense the ambient heat is, and it doesn't bother me. I'm not concerned about the flames because they don't last very long after the wood is converted. But if you do have concerns about how tall the flames get or about burning nearby items, then all you have to do is add the wood in a little bit more slowly, because the flames are in direct proportion to how much conversion is going on at once. So this is pretty normal for about maybe 10 minutes when I first start my fire. It depends on the day, it depends on the moisture content in the wood, and as the heat builds up in the fire, these flames pretty steadily go down. You can see they're already starting to burn down a little bit. The wood is converting to charcoal, not quite there yet, but these video clips are only about 30 seconds in between them. They're not largely spaced out. So I've turned off my air momentarily to show you how our charcoal conversion process is going, and also to point out that the hot part of the fire is right down in the bottom, only an inch or two off of the apex of our inverted triangular shaped firebed. This is a really important detail to note if you actually want to get the heat from your fire into a piece of steel to work it. So don't put your piece at the top of the fire where the wood's still being converted to charcoal. Put it at the bottom and get the benefit of the oven effect with the pieces reflecting all of the heat back down into that core of the fire. So I'm going to start my air again and then put a rod in the fire. This is a 1/2-inch square stock, and you want to be sure that the size of the fire you're running reflects the size of the piece you're trying to work on. So my fire comes up about halfway up the fire bricks that line inside the forge, and if I were really trying to move some serious steel at 1/2 inch, this would be a little bit small for that. But it's adequate to show you guys how quickly a rod can pick up some color even from the first cold heat. And I'm going to pull this out to show you that even after about 1.5 minutes, it's got that taper on the end. It's already picked up some color. And here it is after just a couple more minutes in the fire. I'm going to turn my air off so you can see how far the fire has burned down, and then we'll talk about when to feed it. Because wood is a fairly fluffy or less dense fuel source, you do have to feed the fire fairly often. Exactly how often depends on the characteristics of your particular fuel supply, the type of project you're working on, and how long you intend to keep forging with this fire. So you need to pay attention and feed your fire when it begins to burn down. Adding 2 or 3 new chunks of wood every 10 minutes or so of active forging is a good rough estimate of how often you should feed it. If you feed slowly and steadily, the temperature and volume of the fire will stay consistent, and you'll be able to focus on your forging session. Now that the fire is hot, it flames and smokes far less than when we first started it, even though I've given it about the same amount of green wood to begin converting to charcoal. So I've removed the hood because I want you guys to be able to see inside the forge and notice a couple of things. First, look at how deep my fire is. A deep fire is a good working fire because the wood needs time to travel down to the bottom where the heat is. Remember that when you first put wood on, it's cold, so you don't want that directly on your heat in the bottom of the forge. I'll also point out that I have the divider completely removed from the inside of my forge. I had my forge configured for doing long work, so that pieces could pass completely through. This does mean that I have to scrape my fire towards the front of the forge where the air is on a pretty regular basis. A quick word on the forge hood and how it affects your fire. The hood helps keep the heat inside the fire and off of you, and the smoke going up the chimney. It also makes it easier to accurately gauge colors when you're in direct sun. You don't always have a perfectly dark environment to smith in, and the hood creates a sort of cave around the fire. When you're done forging, I recommend using water to put out your fire completely, because the remaining charcoal is very convenient to help your next fire heat up quickly. So I hope that answered any questions, skepticisms, or frustrations you might have had about blacksmithing with wood. Learning to manage your fire is a really important and basic skill as you learn how to blacksmith. If I missed anything, you still have questions, leave it in the comments section. If you found this helpful, like the video, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss later videos.